The Healing Spring Show, healing families and communities by breaking the stigma of addiction and expanding the scope of recovery. Now here's your host, John Edmonson.
Is there more than one way to achieve recovery and obtain a better life? Is it a pathway, or are there pathways to achieving recovery? Today I have an expert in the field, Paula Garland. She is a professor at UNT. She's also assisted in creating a program at UNT for collegiate recovery to allow students to maintain sobriety and study at the same time, getting their degree. She's going to tell us all about it. Paula, welcome to the show.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being on here. So, I see you all the time at Healing Springs, and you're coming in and you're giving these lectures to our clients, and they love having you. I walked in the other day and I saw up on the screen something that was really interesting to me. It didn't say pathway to recovery, it said pathways to recovery. Can you talk a little bit about that and what that means?
Absolutely. I love being out at Healing Springs. I only get to be out there 3 or 4 hours, but I absolutely love the interaction with the clients. You have a great group out there. Pathways to recovery, and it's a controversial topic, I'll admit that, but pathways to recovery simply means anything that supports recovery. And that can be a mutual aid program. A mutual aid program is what we used to refer to as self-help. We know it's not self-help because it's peers helping peers, not us helping ourselves. It could be body work, like yoga, acupuncture. It could be body work like massage. It could be going to church, going to temple, going to synagogue, a Bible study, a fellowship of other people doing a similar thing to you. It could be going to counseling. It could be going to treatment, living in a recovery residence. It could just be a number of things, even life-enriching seminars and books and workbooks that a person might, digest as part of their recovery. It simply means that if a person is in recovery, they don't just do one thing. There have been some studies that suggest of the people surveyed, only 23% of people in recovery only have what they consider one pathway to recovery. So just to sum up many pathways, it's all the things that a person would do that enriches and supports and enhances their road to recovery.
And it sounds powerful. And this is a change, understand it, because you've been in the field for over 20 years.
Right.
And how it started to what it looks like today is very different. When you first began, what did recovery look like?
Well, there's been a great change, and I can speak to what has happened here in Texas specifically. In the 70s, people that needed treatment for addiction were primarily ending up in psychiatric hospitals or some sort of hospitalization. And whenever addiction started coming, as the primary issue for the people that were treating them, the people that were treating them had a little bit of a difficult time reaching them, the people that they were serving. So they invited fellowships like AA in, and the peer approach just really seemed to have a big impact for the clients. There's a line in the 12-step program, Narcotics Anonymous, that says that one addict working with another, reaching out to another is without parallel, and that is oftentimes true. Is somebody working with someone who knows that another person has been there is sometimes pretty powerful. Well, out of that, people that were in recovery and in the 12-step programs wanted to do this full time. So Texas and the people in Texas that were in the addiction profession moved to have a certification in addiction counseling. And back then we called it a certification in alcohol and drug abuse counseling. It was a KDAC. And you had to do some classes, and you could begin your work with a certification. That brought a number of people from 12-step programs in recovery into the field working as certified counselors.
Right.
And, at the time, I believe the estimate was over 70% of the people in the field working with other people that were in treatment were in recovery themselves. And that has changed over the course of the years.
That's fascinating, because that's what and I know this is going to be a podcast, so be ready for a little bit of controversy, because when people watch this one, we've had a couple different guests. Some people who are just, 12 steps is kind of all that I'm about, or some people it's church is all I'm about, or maybe just therapy. In your case, you're saying that for some people it's going to be, yes, 12 steps, some people it's going to be therapy, some people it's going to be a little bit of combination. And when we first started this journey of recovery, the people in 12 steps, they're the ones that actually got it started?
Right, absolutely. People
Wow.
in recovery. And I think as a counselor and as an educator, what I need to remember is whatever works for a person is the right pathway for them. And that hasn't always been, part of our history. And you asked about when I started in the field. That was in the early 90s. The Texas governor at the time, Ann Richards, was a person in recovery. She knew we had a really big problem in our Texas prison system. Overcrowding, people who needed to be in prison weren't staying long enough because of the overcrowding, and then people who were there with drug or alcohol-related crimes weren't getting any rehabilitation. And so she implemented a program. There were millions of dollars put into the women's prison, and that's where I had my first job, was in a women's prison. And that was an amazing historical event that we put the idea that put sending people to prison for an addiction was punitive, that wasn't helpful. It made society feel better, but it didn't change anything for the person in prison. And our goal isn't it, to have people come out and be productive members of society. That's what we hope for. And if we don't give people any skills that they didn't have before they came, they'll just go back rather than leading this productive life. And it's not a matter of them being bad people, and it's not that addiction is a criminal act. It's something that does need intervention. It does need some sort of treatment, if you will. So the programs they implemented in the Texas prison system were behavior modification programs. So the people would be in prison, and they would do everything that you would do in a prison, work in the kitchen, work in the fields, do those things for about 8 hours a day, and then they would get treatment as well. That's not an ideal environment to do treatment. Treatment requires a bit of vulnerability from time to time, and prison's not an ideal environment to be vulnerable. And there were many things, looking back, I wish would have been different, but I have always believed that it is better than people not getting anything at all. And there are a lot of skills. What didn't work, or what I see now as I look back, over the past 25 years, is that simply giving education to people doesn't necessarily equal change or recovery. There has to be something internally that switches, and many times with people, that is dealing with the issues that cause them to seek substances to begin with.
Yeah, those root causes.
Exactly.
So you're saying a little bit of both. Like, this was actually, although imperfect, was a great start.
Absolutely.
And I think that's for a lot of us who are therapists and counselors, like we think about all these different programs out there. We're not against them. We just say,
Absolutely.
That's great. We also want to offer our piece to it. We also want to connect and collaborate as part of that.
Absolutely.
And when you talk about the early days in recovery, so what I remember, like growing up, when I watched movies on recovery, I think one of them was Clean and Sober with Michael Keaton. You seen that? And so throughout the whole movie, the counselors were these really intense guys. Like I remember, at one point the lead counselor's kicking the door open and, and yelling at this guy or kicking people out of groups. Is that how it used to be?
It did. I'm sure not all environments were that way. Not all milieus were that way. But many of them were, and many of them that I worked in were very, very much, you to the client, you sit down, you be quiet, I have the answers, and here's the answer. And the answer was very black and white. And the answer was often oriented from the same place that the person who was the counselor, who was also in recovery, their experience and their pathway. And what has changed for me, is I can't measure another person's success by my own experiences. I can only measure a person's success. Well, number one, I shouldn't be measuring another person's success, but I can only allow them to measure their success by if it's an improvement for them, rather than, if they're doing, if they're ticking off certain boxes, because anyone can be compliant but not everyone actually changes.
That's a powerful statement. So a lot of people can go through a program and do what they're asked to do, but they're not really making that shift on the inside.
Exactly.
So as we shift away from that, and maybe there's some people who need that kind of intense engagement.
Absolutely.
Just like maybe in the prison system, some people needed that structure.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, but we're saying that there's another group out there that may need something different.
Right.
So if clients are watching this, or are alumni, or people who are thinking about recovery, how would you help them lay out a program? Where would someone start? What would you want to think about?
When someone's entering a program, if they're seeking treatment, I think it's important to visit the websites of treatment centers and read, what does our program offer? Just because it's a treatment center doesn't mean that it's going to be like the treatment center next door. So really see what is their mission? What is their foundation? What's important? If you are a big believer in the 12 steps, it's important to find a treatment center that goes along with and really is strong in the 12 steps. If the 12 steps turn you off and that might be an obstacle to your getting treatment, find a treatment center that might offer different pathways, different mutual aid programs or a different kind of approach. If you have a history of trauma or childhood issues that you need to work out, find treatment programs that are heavy on the therapy. It's just got to be a good fit for you. And I believe as treatment providers, we need to do a better job being clear about what all a client will get in their program, whether they ask or not. And then once someone's in treatment, and part of what I really believe in and do whenever I get to visit Healing Springs is talk about a recovery plan. Planning your life in all of your life areas for recovery. What's it going to look like in all of these areas? And that's different than planning for discharge. Planning for discharge means a date that you get to go home and the very next thing you'll be doing. So you might be going home and living with your parents. You might be going home and living not going home and living in a recovery residence. It's beyond that. Recovery planning looks at every area of the person's life, and I strongly encourage people who are in treatment to begin making the appointments, making the contacts. So let's say you're going to attend Refuge Recovery, which is a mutual aid program whenever you get out of treatment. Then while you're in treatment, pick up the phone, make a phone call to Refuge Recovery in the area that you'll live, and say, "Hi, my name is Paula. I'm in treatment, and I'm getting out mid-July, and I'd like to get some support." People in recovery are amazing, and people at the mutual aid programs are amazing, and part of their recovery is strengthened by helping being of service to other people. So I've seen people in recovery just get in their car and show up at the treatment center for the client, on visitation day. Be there the day they discharge to take them to a meeting or meet them at a meeting. But there's something a little more, there's something stronger about saying, I'm going to do this, and get the meeting date, the time, make a connection there, and you show up more often if you said to somebody, I'll be there at that 5 o'clock meeting next Tuesday, rather than just in your mind imagining that I'll go to Refuge Recovery whenever I get out of treatment. You just, there's a little gap, the treatment gap, between the time you leave the treatment center and the time you get into services, and that's a real high-risk time. And I think anything we don't schedule, commit to, maybe even commit to with another person, it's a lot easier not to follow through.
And you're touching on a really important point and I hear this all the time with clients of almost, I've got this sort of scenario, like I've got this, I'm going to be great. And we have this dance as clinicians. We're like, yes, you're doing so well. We're celebrating, we're graduating you. We also don't think you're in a perfect place. This is life on life terms, as people say.
Yeah.
How can you help clients, or what do you recommend to clients or anybody? They're now starting their recovery. What kind of expectations, long-term plans should they start looking at or doing? Well,
in the recovery planning, I bring up a lot of issues that many times clients tell me, I hadn't thought of that before. When you're in treatment, ideally you're in one of the safest spots you've ever been in your life. So it's it's not easy, but it's pretty simple to say, I've got this. You do have this when you're in a very safe environment, but do you have this once you get out of that environment? So recovery planning has to be beyond the scope of today. You have to look at, the whole picture and everything that possibly could contribute to you not, attaining the recovery or maintaining the recovery. Another thing that I ask clients is, or anyone that is in recovery, is what is your definition of recovery? How do you define it? And many times people tell me things like abstinence, which is easy to measure. You know if you use drugs or not. You know if you drank or not. That's pretty black and white. Abstinence does not equal recovery. Recovery is continuing on a process where you are directing your own life and you are continuing to increase the quality of your life. And it's a lifelong process. It isn't an end goal. Most people, when they get to some of the short-term goals they set, they're ready to get to the next goals, go a little deeper, be a little more enriched, feel a little, higher quality of life. So looking at every aspect that could contribute, I also encourage them, and this is the example I use. If you had to go to court today and defend your recovery, what is your evidence? What is your evidence that you were in? Exactly. Yeah. How can you prove it? And being happy isn't something you can prove. What does it mean to be happy? What does it mean? So that mean, when people tell me often, I'm not isolating. What does that mean? What does that look like? Does that mean that if your family calls you 3 times and that you don't pick up, that's a red flag? Because being simple and saying that, I want to be happy or I don't want to isolate, there's no way I can prove that because you have to quantify that in some way. If abstinence is your goal, then that means what? That means never ingesting any substances, never ingesting any mood or mind-altering chemicals, passing all urine screens. I can prove that. I can provide evidence of that. And I believe that even in our social relationships, which are, some of the most tricky points of recovery, is are there people who are toxic for me? And if there are people who are toxic for me, I need to identify them. And doesn't mean I can't be around them, but I need to think through what will I do when I am around them, rather than waiting till the moment that happens and, kind of reacting to the situation. What's your game plan? Next time you have a holiday, there's a holiday gathering, we can say 6 months from now, there will be a holiday gathering. I know that Uncle Bob is always there and he's pretty toxic for me. And here's the way here are the ways he's toxic for me. Here's how I normally respond to it. If that isn't conducive to recovery, then how will you respond differently? Real scenarios, like when he does this, I will do this.
X, Y, and Z. It's very concrete.
Right. Exactly.
And I think that helps people hearing that. And one of the things you said, too, this is going to be lifelong. There's I see it all the time. We see it in movies, and movies motivate us, but they're there to entertain. So there's the idea of, ta-da, I'm done. Or I hear people who actually have been out, have long-term sobriety, come back into recovery.
Absolutely.
Come back into our treatment center and like, man, I thought I had 10 years, 20 years. And the consistent thing I hear, and maybe you have input on it, is they thought they had arrived. They thought, now I've achieved it. And then they start acting that way. And they feel like they can't talk about, well, now I'm craving or now I'm acting out in other ways. What have you seen about that? What do you recommend?
Well, a couple things I think of there is, one, is that because a recurrence of use produces shame? Do I feel like I'm a bad person if I drink or use again? And did I have a plan if that were to happen? So part of recovery planning is, what will I do if for some reason I drink or use again, or the drinking or using is out of control again? What is my plan of action there? And it doesn't have to be something people feel shame about. And I think treatment programs can offer a lot in that way. Does the treatment center talk about relapse and recurrence of use as a bad thing, like it's a failure? I don't see a recurrence of use as a failure. I see it as a very, very valuable learning tool, because if someone had been in recovery for 10 years, 20 years, like you mentioned, they have a lot of information. They have a lot of information about what it took to attain and maintain that recovery. So I want to know about that. That's an asset. People talk about not dieting, but having a healthy eating plan. I think recovery is similar. If I want to lose 10 pounds, I have to follow this program. And it isn't just when I get there, then I get to go back to eating whatever I want, because I'll go back to the pounds that I, wanted rid of to begin with. If this is what works, I have to continue to do that. If I'm going to expect, the results to be recovery, I have to continue to do what it took to keep me in recovery, or I won't be in recovery. And that's why I think it's kind of akin to any kind of healthy living plan. If I don't want to, have a response in a certain way, then I can't put certain things in my body. Maybe that means white bread. Maybe that means cocaine. That's the only way I can maintain the quality of life that I want is to do what I do on a daily basis.
It's that one day at a time people talk about, and you're giving what does one day at a time really mean, and what does it look like?
Right.
So then that brings up the statement you said is he's got 20 years sobriety or 10 years sobriety, and I'm sitting in their shoes and I'm going, okay, I've had this amount of sobriety, and I went back out. Do I just have one day now? No. Am I a failure? Am I, all these different things go through his mind when people listen to them. Do we ignore what they say? Because watch out for him, he just went back out. Or therapists, maybe they're in recovery and they go back out, and now how do we manage all that?
Well, again, I think it comes down to what you define recovery as. There are many different ways to look at what recovery is. For many people, recovery is sobriety. It is an absence of substances. I don't believe that that's what recovery is. I know many people who can be abstinent from substances but aren't living a higher quality of life or doing daily improvements. That isn't my idea or the ideal picture for me of what recovery is. Recovery to me is just is working each day to be a better human being. If there's a recurrence of use along the way, that's important. That's a big event. But that doesn't mean I have to throw away everything that I learned, gained, knew over that course of that 10 years that I was actively in recovery. That means I know I have the tools. I have the tools because I did it for 10 years. I have the tools to pick those tools back up and start using them in my life on a daily basis. That may mean going back to treatment for a while. That may mean going back to the mutual aid program that was so beneficial to me. And mutual aid programs often do mark times of abstinence with, a token or some sort.
Those chips and the celebrations.
Right. So according to many 12-step programs, you would have to reestablish. They call it reestablishing the sobriety date. And that's fine. That's fine if a person goes to 12-step programs and that's the program they follow. What I think you don't have to do is feel bad, guilty, shameful, remorseful over that event. It just was an event, and use it for an experience to learn, maybe so it doesn't have to happen again.
Right, or maybe not even give up. That's what I see a lot. Like, oh man, I just blew it. I'm never going to get that 20 years back, or I'm never going to get that 5 years back.
Yeah, similar to a diet. If I eat a cupcake after we leave here today, my mindset might be, oh, well, I blew it today. Might as well eat a pizza.
Let's just go dive on in, yeah.
And I know that if I eat a pizza, it's going to be worse tomorrow. It's going to be harder tomorrow to eat yogurt in the morning. So similar to addiction. So if I blew it because I used once, intervene and right then, rather than, oh, well, I already blew it, might as well spend the rest of the week and the rest of my paycheck, just intervene right then.
Just make that change in real time. And you bring up that other point. We say recovery. So many times when I hear recovery, they say maybe drugs, alcohol. Now we know about opiates, on a more kind of public scale. But really, addiction could be, because I have friends watching, and people watching back, and they're going to go, I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't have addiction. Could other things be addictive?
Absolutely. And I'll speak to the collegiate recovery program that we have at UNT. Ours was the first in the nation to embrace recovery that was all-inclusive, not specifically with substance use disorder. Recovery, the SAMHSA, who's the government, United States kind of a source of information for recovery, well, for all things related to mental health and addiction. They define recovery as a process of change where individuals improve their health and their wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to reach their full potential. That has nothing to do with abstinence. So that means recovery can be from anything. And I truly believe that. So if a person experiences depression, they can absolutely be in recovery from that. People can be in recovery from, childhood events, sexual abuse, childhood abuse of any kind. People can be in recovery from gambling, from disordered eating, from any kind of situation where at some point there was a pivot. They made changes, and they intervened, or someone helped them intervene, and some event happened, and from that place they move forward to continue on a daily basis to monitor that, to improve that, and to walk in a journey of that I want it to be different than this. And different than this requires consciousness on a daily basis of what it takes for me to not go back to where I was when I needed that intervention to begin with.
You just when I heard that, you made recovery sound exciting to me.
It is.
I was like, wow, I want some of that. Let me recover, get more wellness, feel better, reach my full potential.
Who doesn't want that?
Who doesn't want that?
Exactly.
Right? I think businesses want that.
Absolutely.
Maybe your business can be in recovery. It's going through a hard time. Let's do it. Our government, our life.
Without a doubt.
Wow.
I have experienced times in my adult life where I've gone 2 years, let's say, with absolutely no sugar. Because I know sugar is not good for me. Just the way my chemical makeup is, sugar is not good for me. And then I eat a Rice Krispie treat one weekend, and for 6 months after that, I consume sugar. I feel bad. I have the knowledge, though, of that 2 years when I didn't, so I always kind of have that hope that I can get back to that place that I was. Well, I get back. I'm there again, no sugar. That doesn't mean I'm a bad person. That just means I have some information. I have information that says sugar's not really good for me. I have the choice. I can consume sugar if I want. No one's forcing me. But I know that if I don't, on just every day, I wake up earlier in the morning, I stay up later at night, I'm more productive throughout the day, my thoughts are clearer, and my body feels better. So makes sense why I wouldn't eat sugar. Not easy, but simple. And so I can go back to that anytime. Might I need an intervention at some point if it gets too much? Maybe. And in an intervention would be like someone in my life saying, I've noticed that when you do this happens. How can I support you? And that's also, intervention's also some accountability. So the people around me know who I am, what I am, and what's going on for me. So they can also notice my red flags, my warning signs, things that, just to kind of look for, rather than just assuming this is all about you're just an awful person, you're grouchy, you're lazy, whatever those things are, whatever those symptoms are of whatever you consume. People around me can say, okay, this is for a reason. This isn't who she is. This is a symptom of something. What is it? How can I help? How can I support? How can I share this information with her?
And so this isn't something we do on it. Recovery is not something we do by ourselves. I can't go to the store, order the AA book online, or I can't go to the store and, hey, I've got this new diet book and try to do it by myself.
Well, you certainly can try. You
can
certainly try, but human beings are just uniquely kind of wired for connection with other people. We need other people. We just do in our lives. And we will find connection, whether it's healthy or unhealthy, just because of our need to be connected. So recovery is something where we need to be connected with healthy individuals who have a like pathway, or who have a like goal, or who support our goal. It is very difficult for people to live the very same life they lived before recovery and stay in recovery, because we kind of attract what we are, or attract what we want. And if and to be honest, if we're in recovery and we're getting better every day and the quality of our life is improving, we probably aren't going to be real attracted to the same group of people that support our addiction. At some point it's going to wear out, and we're not going to be interested
no longer feel
in
that connection anymore.
We're not going to want to do the same things. Our conversations will kind of wane. We're not going to have the same feeling about them as we did before, and that's not a negative. That's not a positive. It just is, and life is that way. We grow and we change, and people come into our lives for a season. Some people stay for the rest of our lives, but not everyone does, and people are there, to teach lessons and serve purposes for the time they're there. But it's okay to let go of some of the relationships that you entered, into the treatment process with. If people are toxic, we have to be honest about that and set some boundaries for ourselves. And interestingly, that doesn't mean we have to sit down with that person and have a long talk and with them. Sometimes it just means we just withdraw a little bit from the intensity of the interactions, and eventually time will go by and we have more interest, more interactions with people who are on the same path.
So we don't have to go out now that we're in recovery, get everybody into recovery and change them. We just have to change how we relate to them.
Absolutely. Well, that's all we can change. I think that's one of the biggest fights of people anyway, is we focus so much on seeing if we could do things to make other people different so we're more comfortable rather than becoming comfortable ourselves and living differently.
Yes, that's part of that life journey.
It really is.
So you mentioned something about, because part of the show is Mythbusters, and you mentioned sugar, and I've heard that sugar from the studies is more addictive than cocaine.
I have heard that as well.
Are there other addictions out there? Are there other addictions out there that we're not even talking about, or maybe that we kind of know but don't mention?
A good rule of thumb is anything that causes consequences in your life and you want to continue to do despite knowing that there are consequences, is a good rule of thumb for maybe this is an addiction, or maybe if you don't want to call it an addiction, at least there's something I need to change here. Some people have that with the internet. Some people have that with social media. Some people have that with sex. Sex doesn't serve the same purpose for a person with sex addiction as it does for a person who has sex with an intimate partner just for the enjoyment or the closeness of it. It serves a different reward. So some people can, get in their car and go to a casino and gamble for a couple of hours and enjoy themselves, leave and never think about it again until maybe a friend brings up a trip to Las Vegas, Other people will go spend way too much money, more money than they know that they should spend. Maybe the consequence is a fight with a spouse or spending all your rent money. They will go back to the casino under circumstances of addiction, even though that consequence was pretty brutal. They will go again. That can be true of shopping. It can be true of anything we do in excess and it causes consequences. If I have, celebrity status money, I may be able to buy a couple of cars, and a big house and a whole bunch of clothes. But if I'm doing that on a salary that just kind of covers everything, and I put myself in jeopardy because I have to do that, then that definitely falls in line with the idea of addiction.
So it's almost anything that we feel like we can't go without, that goes beyond the normal need, and we're so obsessed about it, it's hurting our lives.
Exactly. And in the profession, there's controversy around whether we call certain things addiction or not. So I want to say, I'm not saying something is physically addictive. I'm saying that anything we do in excess that causes consequences in our lives and we want to continue to do despite the consequences, and we're aware of the consequences, those are things we should take a look at. Maybe we ought to take a look at that, and if we want something different, we have to do something different.
Okay, and we're starting to come towards an end of the show, but I want to ask, is there any final messages you have that you want to share with the viewers, clients, alumni, anyone out there?
Recovery is not boring. You mentioned that before. Recovery is pretty exciting. I think anyone that has an addiction, when there's an intervention, someone in their life says, we've got to do something different, or they say themselves, I have to do something different, that's an exciting time. Because there are lots and lots of unconscious people walking around in the world who never get to really dig into why they do what they do. or how to do things differently. And how much rich information and process you get when you come to a treatment center is amazing. I mean, you really do get to take a little bit of time out of your life, just for this little bit of time, and dig into everything, find these answers. And you don't have to live unconsciously, kind of not knowing why you're kind of motivated or intentioned in the direction that you are. What a gift that is, you know? Wouldn't that be amazing if everyone, rather people who don't have some intervention like an addiction, they may wake up at 50, 60 years old and go, wow, what have I done with my life? You know, why have I stayed in this marriage? Or why do I keep getting divorced, you know, and never have had an event take place that they had to do that much investigation. I think addiction can be a very good gift, because recovery is an amazing thing, not about abstinence. It's not just about abstinence. Recovery really is about just becoming the person that you want to be, and kind of directing that life on your own.
So people who want to jump into this exciting field and they have more questions for you, how do they get a hold of you or find you?
Oh, well, if they just Google UNT and my name, Paula Garland, they can find my email address. They'll find my profile at UNT, and I would be happy to answer questions. I do work in the addiction studies program, and I can set people on the right path. Even if it's not at UNT, I can tell them what they need to do.
All right, Paula, thank you for being on our show.
Thank you so much.
Helpful.
I appreciate it.
All right, so it looks like there is more than one way to get sober, have recovery, and have a beautiful life. And recovery turns out is actually fun and exciting. So we'll see you next time.